If you want to get 1 million followers, it's not going to be on Facebook. It's going to have to be on another platform. But the majority of us would be better if we just focused on the first 100 and then the second 100 and then, the last 100 before we get to 1,000. If you can do that, you don't need 100,000 followers to have a successful podcast. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed the last episode, episode number 90. Did the Apple update affect your listens? Hopefully they didn't, or hopefully it didn't, but hopefully you got some value from that episode regardless. So I know I said I was going to talk about doing pre-calls for guest interviews today, but I want to throw a different episode in just because it's something that I've really noticed over the last probably 6 months that I think would be more valuable to share today, and then we'll push pre-calls to next week. Should your podcast have a Facebook page? One of the most common questions I get asked when I'm coaching someone or when I'm doing a podcast breakthrough session is, should my podcast have its own dedicated social media page? Whether that's Instagram, whether that's TikTok, whether that's Facebook, whatever it is. And I usually say no. I usually say, even if you look at, what's a really good example of this? I guess Barstool is probably one of the best examples of this. If you look at Barstool, the entire Barstool business, Barstool itself probably has the most followers, and then each of the podcasts have a smaller amount of followers. The reason is the only people who are going to tune in to your social media page are going to be the people who are interested in what you have to say on your podcast. Where if you're more of a personal brand, I would much rather have a social media page that has you traveling, and it has you with your family, and it has you going to the gym. I would much rather treat it like a personal brand because I think that's the way things are going anyway. So yes, some bigger shows have their own dedicated social media page where they just have clips and stuff, but look at the amount of followers those pages have versus the hosts, for example. Very rarely is it. So let's do this. If Joe Rogan had, and he might, I don't know, but if he had the JRE, Joe Rogan Experience Instagram page, it would have less followers than Joe Rogan does. Just because Joe Rogan is the personal brand, the podcast is something that he does. Now, again, it's dangerous using examples of people who are super, super famous and at the top of the game, but just as an example, I like to use that because it's kind of easy to visualize. So my number one thing is I always tell people, you are not a podcast. A podcast is something that you do. Some of the stuff that gets the best engagement on social media has nothing to do with the podcast. I would much rather put up a picture of my cats and get 10 people to follow me that like cats, and maybe eventually we find 4 of those people who realize we have a podcast that they want to come listen to. That's really my thought. I think if you have a page that's just dedicated to your podcast, you lose the opportunity to get people that never would have came and follow that page to eventually transition to the show. So that's kind of my top thought for this. But in this episode, or right now, I want to talk specifically about a Facebook page. So we work with a lot of businesses. A lot of businesses have Facebook pages because it's an actual business, and they have hours, and they have a website, and they have a phone number, and they have a physical location, and they post content on there. It's different for a lot of our podcasters, right? Even us, we don't have a physical location. We don't have an office. Everything is digital. Everything is virtual. Alan and I meet up in person occasionally, but the majority of what we do is completely online. We don't need a Facebook page for the podcast. If we want to run ads, we kind of do, but Alan has his own personal page. I have my own personal page. That works really, really well for us because it's not that I'm just going to share podcast clips all the time. I'm going to share, I went to the gym today on my story. I'm going to share my wife and I are traveling, or whatever it might be. That's worked really, really well for us. Facebook for us is an unsung hero. We have a lot of engagement and a lot of conversations going on. I'll say a lot of conversations because it's not always a lot of engagement. But there's something interesting about when somebody follows you or friends you on Facebook, it seems way more personal because you can only have 5,000 people. And I've had a lot of people say, well, shouldn't I have a Facebook page because I can have as many people as I want like and follow it? It just doesn't seem nearly as personal. It's just not as personal. So when somebody friend requests you or you friend request someone, you can message them right then. And it's different on Facebook. At least that's what we've noticed. So I think Facebook is something that's very untapped. Now, you could easily say, well, my demographic's not on Facebook. It's a waste of time. That's a deeper conversation, right? That's a deeper conversation. But if your fear is, well, I can only have 5,000 people on my Facebook, go fill up the 5,000 with podcast listeners and see what happens. That could be a really good goal. I'm going to get 5,000 people who listen to this podcast to become part of this community, my personal Facebook, right? You can only have 5,000 people in your personal Facebook. But imagine if you had 5,000 people who liked what you do. They liked who you are. They like what you do. They like the content that you post. I would much rather have 5,000 what they call raving fans. I don't like the term fans. It's weird to me. I don't like that. We call them family members. I'd rather have 5,000 family members than 50,000 followers on Instagram. 100%. Yeah, getting a good amount of followers is good because it helps with perception and all that stuff. And Instagram's all over the place right now, as I'm sure you're noticing, most likely. But I think Facebook is untapped. I really do. I think Facebook is an untapped resource for a lot of us. So to answer the question, honestly, if you have a Facebook page, I probably wouldn't put a ton of effort into it over a personal, because you are way more than a podcast. You're a personal brand. If you're doing this, you're a personal brand. And ultimately, if you're trying to get to the place where you can turn this into a business, you're still gonna have a personal brand within it. And this is always my thought. Okay, cool. Let's say you have a podcast that's all about sports. Maybe let's say it's about football, the NFL. About NFL, you do an episode every single week, and when the season is happening, you really do fire episodes and you do live streams, and it's awesome. You love it. A lot of people on your Facebook are people that you know personally and you've known for years, possibly. A lot of people that maybe you went to high school with, you went to college with, you worked with. A lot of people who might like what you're doing. But the other side of it is, every time somebody self-identifies as a listener, and if you're not adding them on social media platforms, you're potentially making a mistake. So let's say you reach out to me and say, Kev, I love the podcast. I've been listening, blah, 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 blah. One of the first things I should be doing, and I'm not always doing this because there's a lot to do and sometimes this falls through the cracks. But one of the first things I should do is find you on Instagram, find you on LinkedIn, find you on Facebook. Because you might not follow me, but it doesn't mean I can't build that relationship with you. And then maybe you like the content and my engagement goes up and you follow back and you become someone who likes the content. Sometimes we have to go find the people. Sometimes we have to go out and say, oh, I remember Brittany. Yeah, Brittany actually emailed us and said she loved episode number 14. We got to find Brittany. What was Brittany's last name? All right, let's try to find Brittany on Facebook, Instagram. It's a really deep rabbit hole because it can be really hard to find people, but it's super valuable because if they like what you do, they want to be surrounded by more of it.
What's going on, guys? My name is Austin, and I've been working with Kevin for a few months now. If there's one thing that I find super valuable is his expertise on how to position the podcast to the right audience and fit the content into the overall business plan. And frankly, when we work together, he challenges me a lot. There were some tough conversations that he initiated with me so that I can really grow in the business. Besides the coaching part, the editing team does amazing work with editing and show notes and staying on top of all communications. Overall, my experience working with Kevin has really been top-notch.
So Facebook has been something very big for us. And I just wonder, I've heard a lot of people say, well, Facebook sucks and nobody likes it on Facebook. Nobody does this. Nobody does that. I just wonder if when you get somebody that self-identifies, you go friend them on Facebook, if they're into what you're doing, they're probably going to engage. And this is the other thing. I don't know how many. So let's imagine that the average person has 500 Facebook friends. I don't know what the number is, but let's say hypothetically. They have 500 Facebook friends. Let's say the average person follows 1,000 people on Instagram. Who do you think is going to see your content more? Probably the person who only has 500 people there. Not only, I mean, that's a lot of people. But there's 500 people versus 1,000 people. If they're following 1,000 people, they're going to see a ton of stuff go through. If they're following 500, they might not. Or if they're friends with 500, they might not. How many of the people that they're friends with are family members that never post? How many of the people that they're friends with are relatives from people that they know that never post? How many of them are people that just never post? I think you have a much better opportunity to get seen by your community on Facebook because I think the numbers are probably different. So that's another thought. Now, again, if you want to get 1 million followers, it's not going to be on Facebook. It's going to have to be on another platform. But the majority of us would be better if we just focused on the first 100 and then the second 100 and then, the last 100 before we get to 1,000. If you can do that, you don't need 100,000 followers to have a successful podcast. You don't need 100,000 followers to turn your podcast into a profitable business. You need 1,000 people who are consistent with what they're consuming, what you're putting out consistently. If you can get 1,000 people, and I know it doesn't sound like that many probably, but you can have a business with 1,000 people. Trust me, I know a lot of people who have a large following who aren't making the money you think they are. It's good. Yeah, it's good to have a large following and maybe brands reach out to you and do stuff like that, but it's not what most people think it is. So the moral of the story for this episode for me is Facebook might be something you're underutilizing and it might be worth experimenting with. Instagram has gone down for a lot of us. I know TikTok's in a weird place with the government and who knows what's going to happen with that. If Instagram keeps trending the way it is and people aren't happy about it and TikTok goes away, where are people going to go? A lot of people are going to go back to Facebook. So just don't underutilize Facebook. And what I've heard many times from people is, well, I want to keep business and personal separate. There's no such thing. Not anymore. No, not anymore. Yeah, so your cousin probably doesn't care about your podcast. That's okay. I've had conversations, and this has been strange for me. I've had conversations from people that I haven't talked to since high school, but it's about the podcast. And it's, hey, you're doing amazing stuff. Awesome. Good for you. Let me know the next time you have an event, or let me know the next time you have group coaching. That's been a really interesting thing. But one of the reasons is they're seeing it on Facebook. That's one of the things. Facebook, for a lot of us, is people that we grew up with. Instagram it could be anybody. Facebook tends to be, at least in the beginning when you first started, it tends to be more local because that's kind of the way Facebook was in the beginning. Instagram's different because, yeah, it's just different. Instagram's a different platform. So that's my advice in this episode. Check out Facebook, a personal Facebook page. If you already have a personal Facebook page, I would probably start trying out some of the content that you're creating for the podcast and see what happens. That's my advice. It can be scary for sure. There's a lot of uncertainty there for sure. You might get negative feedback from some people for sure. But I just think Facebook is underutilized and there might be something there for you. And it's really easy to message people on Facebook Messenger. It's really, really, really easy because there's a lot of people that are there and there's a lot of people using Facebook Messenger. Instagram DMs too, for sure, but Facebook Messenger more. Here's another good thought. How many spam messages do you get in your Instagram DMs every day versus how many spam messages do you get in your Facebook Messenger? I don't get any spam. I won't say any. For every 50 pieces of spam I get on Instagram, I probably get 1 for Messenger. So that's another thing to put out there. It means when somebody messages you, it's usually something real on Messenger, and you can have a conversation through that. So that's my take for this episode. I know everybody has different experiences. I know some people just hate Facebook. Other people hate Instagram. Some people hate TikTok. Some people hate LinkedIn, whatever it is. But I think a personal Facebook page is a really good place to go. And depending on what you're talking about, I also think having a personal LinkedIn profile that you post on is probably worth it too. It's not as professional as it used to be. I've put raps up on LinkedIn that got pretty decent love. And again, when I say decent love, I'm not saying I got millions of likes or anything like that, but decent compared to other stuff I posted. I have some true few family members on LinkedIn that like almost everything I post, so you just never know. Yeah, you might only have 300 people on LinkedIn, but 300 people, if you can worry about the quality of the relationship you have with the quantity of people you have, that is a beautiful place to live. I don't care if you have 100 people who listen to the show. Awesome. Let's go try to build a real authentic connection with all 100 of them. And then, okay, now we have 500. Awesome. Let's go try to figure out who are those other 400 people and how can we connect with them behind the scenes and add value. And that's how things really start to compound. Yeah, you can get found and you can be on the top charts and all that stuff, but what you do in terms of your one-on-one conversations is going to be huge. So don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking, well, I have to have a business page and I have to have an Instagram about my podcast. At the end of the day, you're a personal brand. And I'm willing to bet a personal brand is going to get more reach than a professional brand or a business page because it's more intriguing. If it's just podcast clip after podcast clip after podcast clip, anybody who doesn't self-identify as a listener is gone. But if you have experiences and you have a family and you're doing this and you work out and you travel here and whatever it is, it's a better way to get engagement from what I've seen. So take it for what it is. If it's not aligned, don't do it. But it is something that I would say is probably worth a look. If you have not yet booked a podcast breakthrough session and you're interested, just let me know. I had somebody reach out the other day and they said, hey, I heard about this podcast breakthrough session. What's that all about? So we're going to set one up in the very near future. Whatever it is, it could be about this. Hey, I have a Facebook page and I have a personal and I have a Instagram for my podcast, but I also have a personal. What are we going to do with that? I had a call with a client recently, but we can do this in a podcast breakthrough session where we went through their entire business. And it was, okay, this is your social media, this is the podcast, this is next, this is next, this is next. Get rid of that. And the person left with way more clarity. So if it's clarity you're seeking, it will be my goal to deliver that to you on that free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. Next week, for episode number 92, as promised, we are going to do, should you do pre-calls before guest interviews? We will do that tomorrow. I potentially have some very exciting stuff coming up in the next couple months. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'm thinking of having a very few select guests on. I'm not sure. I won't drop any names yet because I'm not sure. But I'm thinking that could be valuable. And it would be something along the lines of I'd have someone on who's an expert in YouTube. I'd have someone on who's an expert in speaking. I'd have someone on who's a really good interviewer. That type of stuff. Is it something I'm going to do every week? I don't know. I'm really nervous to make a promise and then not be able to deliver or put myself under so much pressure to do it. So I don't know how it's going to look. I don't know if it'll be one person every month, whenever, and we'll just consider it a special episode. I don't know, but I just wanted to throw it out there as a potential. If you're interested in that, let me know. I'm happy to get any feedback on that. As always, I hope you feel like you have a good social media strategy. I hope that feels good. I hope that you're getting results. I hope that you're getting people that self-identify. I hope you're getting subscribers. Maybe you're on the top charts. If you are, congrats. I hope that for you. I hope you're getting great guests and you're having great conversations. I hope you're getting on other podcasts. And I hope you're enjoying the ride as much as you can. I hope you're enjoying the ride. Until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and we will talk to you